Ministers in Brussels on Wednesday, US Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth laid out the Trump administration's vision for a peace deal, saying that Ukraine would probably not be admitted to the bloc or be able to recover all the territory it has lost to Russia since 2014.
The United States does not believe that NATO membership for Ukraine is a realistic outcome of a negotiated settlement. Instead, any security guarantee must be backed by capable European and non-European troops. The United States remains committed to the NATO alliance and to the defense partnership with Europe. Full stop. But the United States will no longer tolerate an imbalanced relationship which encourages dependency.
And for more on this, we can go to Dave Keating, our correspondent in Brussels. Good morning, Dave. Pete Hegseth's speech was very much Washington telling fellow NATO members how things were going to be. What was their reaction to this?
Well, there was a real reaction of shock by Europeans to the two shock developments yesterday. One was Hegseth telling them that the US will no longer support NATO's accession for Ukraine. And the other was, of course, this announcement by Donald Trump that he had had a conversation with Vladimir Putin and they had essentially started peace talks without Ukraine. These peace talks appear to be bilateral. Both of these things violate central tenets of what European leaders have been insisting the past months, that NATO's place is in Ukraine, that NATO will eventually join Ukraine, and that there can be no talks about Ukraine without Ukraine. So leaders were pretty stunned. We had some reactions, for instance, from the German foreign minister who said Ukraine must be at the table and Europeans must be at the table. We heard that soundbite from the French foreign minister as well, saying that Europeans cannot be ignored in this process. But guess what? The Trump administration clearly seems intent on ignoring Europeans. So today is going to be an interesting day. Today is day 2 of this NATO Defense Ministers Summit. At 8:30, we're going to be getting a press conference with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte and U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. I'll be there. That is going to be really interesting to watch because Rutte has two choices here. He can either disavow what he was saying just yesterday and sign up to this Trump administration plan to saying that, okay, NATO's not realistic, and yes, this is great that Donald Trump is having this bilateral negotiation, or he can criticize Hegseth, who will be standing right next to him, and say Europe still insists that Ukraine is joining NATO and that the peace talks have to be conducted with Ukraine and preferably also with Europeans. So that could be some fireworks between the two of them. Now, Rutte, he's known as a blunt guy. He's the former Dutch prime minister. So you never know, but it would be uncharacteristic for the NATO Secretary General to be so honest with an American defense minister. The fact is that NATO is an American-dominated military alliance. That is simply because the US is the largest partner by far. And while the Secretary General may always be not American for symbolic reasons, it is the US that calls the shots. And if the US says that Ukraine is not joining NATO, Ukraine is not joining NATO. So both Rutte, Zelensky, Europeans, they're all in a very difficult position here because they know that Europe cannot give Ukraine the resources it needs to continue this war on its own. They need those American resources. And so in the end, as we heard from Zelensky's statement, Zelensky had been so humiliated by not being part of those talks and simply being called to inform him of what Trump and Putin had been talking about. But Zelensky had to put a brave face on it. And I expect today the Europeans are going to be trying to put as brave a face on this, effectively what is an insult from the United States, as possible. But who knows? Rutte is known for being blunt. Maybe he'll have some blunt things to say.
Now, Hegseth also said that the security of Ukraine is going to be more a concern for Europe than Washington. And of course, Volodymyr Zelensky said earlier in the week that European security without American guarantees is worth nothing. Is this circle going to be squared at all?
The problem is time. Europeans would like it if they had made better choices 10 years ago and were in a position right now to defend Ukraine on their own, even if the US pulls out. But the fact is that they are not. Everyone knows it, and Zelensky knows it. So they are increasing spending very rapidly since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Almost all NATO countries meet that 2% of GDP target now, other than a few like Italy and Spain. But they're not there yet. And these are all very recent developments. And there's now EU spending on defense, but they can't decide how they're going to spend that. So the reality is they do need the U.S. support. Now, right now, the military aid going to Ukraine is about 50-50. It's 50% European, 50% American. So essentially that the aid is already equalized, which is the word that Mark Rutte keeps using as what the Trump administration wants. But I think what's clear is what the Trump administration, it doesn't want an equalized amount. It wants minimal U.S. involvement here. And also they're pulling out of the control structures for delivering this aid. So the big question is, how can the Europeans step up?